Hello, welcome to week 4 of Political Economy. This week we're going to be talking about elections. Elections are considered to be the backbone of an American democracy and democracy in general, and it seems like that we are always in the middle of an election season somewhere. Of course, every 4 years we have a presidential election. Every other year we have a House of Representatives and a Senate election. And then some states have elections even in the years in between, such as the governors of New Jersey and Virginia, I think, are always the year right after a presidential election. So if you live in Virginia, where Regent University is, you have an election 3 out of every 4 years of any given period of time. Elections are the chance for the people to have their say. Of course, in most cases in an American election, we get about 50 to 75% turnout for a presidential election, and then something significantly less for non-presidential elections, which is kind of interesting because if there's any election in which your vote is probably going to make the most difference, it's going to be for a local election where turnout might be low, the issues are very local, very close to the people, and it's possible that your vote, or at least a small group of people, can actually swing the election one way or the other. It is highly, highly unlikely that your vote will ever make a difference in a presidential election. It's just statistical probability is almost zero for that. Even back in 2000, when uh, soon to be President Bush was faced off against current Vice President Al Gore at the time, where the election came down to this long drawn out recount in Florida that took almost a month to get done. Um, the final tally was something like 536 votes or something along those lines, the difference between Bush and Gore, in which case no one person made the difference. Obviously, a few people here and there scattered around the state might have made the difference. Um, and there have been other elections, like the election between Richard Nixon and John Kennedy in 1960, which was decided by 100,000 votes in the popular vote count, in which case, like 2 votes per jurisdiction throughout the country would have made the difference between Kennedy being elected and Nixon being elected in 1960. As it turned out, of course, Nixon was elected later. But even in that case, if you were the only one to change your vote, it wouldn't have made any difference. The point being that in big elections where lots and lots and lots of people, millions of people are going to turn out, it's highly unlikely that your vote is going to be the deciding factor. It is not that likely that your vote will be the deciding factor for town council or mayor or even dog catcher, but it's more likely than if you're voting for president or even governor or senator. Having said that, I'm not encouraging you or discouraging you to vote. There are all kinds of reasons to vote. But we do want to understand the practical nature of elections. In most of democracies, there are 2 ways in which a government is formed. In the American system, a candidate tries to put together a coalition of voters. He appeals to various constituency groups with different kinds of appeals in hopes that he can or she can attract enough voters from this group and that group and another group to put together a winning coalition. That's the American form, where we tend to have 2 parties vying for any particular seat. It is occasional in some local elections where you can have more than one party vying, or in some cases no party is vying, in which case it's a wide open election based upon characteristics of each individual candidate. In other elections, in the parliamentary type system, as opposed to our democratic republic, in a more of a parliamentary system, we have what we might think of as expressive voting, where people vote for the candidate they want, and then coalitions are formed after the fact. In some cases, a party might win enough seats to win an outright majority and form a government, as they call it in the parliamentary system, where the dominant party, or even in some cases the party with an outright majority, is able to form a government, choose their party leaders, prime minister, and staff the cabinet offices and so forth. But in a lot of cases, where no one party wins an outright majority, they have to form coalitions between parties. Um, Most recently, in England, they just uh, had a coalition government under Prime Minister David Cameron. In a subsequent election, his party has won an outright majority. But before this most recent election, which took place I think in 2014, they had a coalition government where the Conservative or Tory party had formed a coalition with a party called the Liberal Party to be the governing coalition. And so no one party had an outright majority, so they had to form a coalition of parties that then formed an outright majority in the English Parliament. There are a number of ways in which elections can be determined. Um, there is what we commonly think of as first past the post, which basically means that the candidate with the biggest vote share is the candidate that wins. This can result in a number of issues, though. For instance, if you have 3 or 4 candidates running, it's possible for your candidate to win with, say, 30% of the vote or even 25% of the vote. Um, that lends itself to being a stable government. We know that somebody is going to win, it gets done, and regardless of what kind of vote share they got, they're the winner as long as they're more than anybody else. But it can also lead to people winning who really aren't the favored candidate. For instance, let's say we have candidates A, B, C, and D, and A wins with 30% of the vote. But A is really liked by 30% of the people and then despised by the other 70%. And the other 70%, while split up between candidates B, C, and D, would have been happy with anyone else other than A. So A wins, even though he's not liked by most of the people, while B, C, and D and their supporters get nothing. Some systems have looked to address that issue by allowing for a more sophisticated and subtle voting method where you can vote for your candidates in rank order. Now, I don't know of any country that's doing this nationwide, but I do know of some organizations that do this, so that you can express on your ballot, I want B as my first, C as my second, D as my third, and A as my fourth choice. And then, if the one of the ways that you can tally it up is you tally up how many votes each candidate got for first, second, third, and fourth, and that can influence who actually wins. And in a system like that, A would never have a chance to win. B, C, or D would undoubtedly be the winner, depending on how many first, second, and third place votes they got. So there are a number of ways in which elections can be put together, structured, and organized. And we'll talk more about this when we get to our discussion on rules, which I believe is in week 5. Now, your question for this week is about, on the discussion board, also asks about other ways that people decide who they're going to vote for. In the television age, looks and charisma and just how telegenic a person can have some influence. In some cases, quite a bit of influence. How they carry themselves on TV, how they come off at interviews, can often be much more persuasive than the actual stands on issues, the substance, and the policies that they offer. And so we get situations where people who see candidates on TV like one candidate, and people who hear candidates more on the radio like a different candidate. TV has a significant influence on the way we perceive our candidates and even how we think about the issues. So as you go forward, especially if you're in an election year, you can be thinking about these various things and thinking about how coalitions are put together, how governments form, and how candidates manage to put themselves out there and win the election. You'll read a good bit more about things that I did discuss in the video, as well as some things I did discuss here this week, and I will see you in the discussion board.